Welcome to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Kate Moore-Youssef and I'm a wellbeing and lifestyle coach, EFT practitioner, mum to 4 kids and passionate about helping more women to understand and accept their amazing ADHD brains. After speaking to many women just like me and probably you, I know there is a need for more health and lifestyle support for women newly diagnosed with ADHD. In these conversations, you'll learn from insightful guests, hear new findings and discover powerful perspectives and lifestyle tools to enable you to live your most fulfilled, calm and purposeful life wherever you are on your ADHD journey. Here's today's episode. Today I am joined by Jessie Hewitson. She is an award-winning journalist. She's an ADHDer. She's a parent to 2 neurodivergent children, and she's also the director of NeuroUniverse, which is a company that trains other companies to better understand ND employers. And she has also written another brilliant book called Autism: How to Raise a Happy Autistic Child. So Jessie, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really pleased.
I've got your book in front of me, which is ADHD, How to Raise a Happy ADHD Child. And I was just saying before that I think it's such a helpful book for so many parents who are navigating this new system, this new world of advocating children, understanding themselves, wanting to do the best they can to support their children, but also looking as parents, how can we help ourselves while we're also helping our children? And it can feel very overwhelming at times. So I think your book is really very helpful and very empowering. I'd love to hear a little bit about, I guess, what led you to writing these books. Obviously, being a parent, to neurodivergent children. Can you tell us a little bit about your backstory, I guess, from pre-diagnosis to where you are now?
Yeah. So, I grew up in London. My memories of school really are not knowing what I'm meant to be doing, trying to copy other people's work, just so bored, difficulties with friendships, etc., etc. Ended up working as a journalist for 20 odd years, had my eldest son who was autistic, and then going through this kind of grieving process after I discovered he was autistic, feeling like the worst thing in the world had happened to us. And I basically had this baby or toddler who was very unhappy, and I assumed it was the autism's fault that he was unhappy. And then I wrote a book because there was just such poor information. This was 10 years ago back then. And, the concept neurodiversity wasn't discussed in the general public. And it was all just so doom laden and everything, but I wanted to write something better. And in writing the book, something amazing happened that I realized actually it wasn't the autism that had made him unhappy. It was my lack of knowledge about autism and my fears of autism, really. So by interviewing autistic people, some of whom became really good friends of mine, I lost my fear of autism and also developed that appreciation for difference, and then sort of discovered that once you've got a child who you feel either is happy or you can see that they're on that way, then suddenly difference isn't so sort of scary anymore.
What was that fear of autism that you had? What was the fear that you felt that maybe was so subconscious you didn't even know that there was fear there?
Yeah. Well, I think it was ignorance because, again, I think it's easy to forget, how autism was portrayed even 10 years ago. My eldest is 15. So really, when you watch TV programs about autistic people, it was people in distress. It was, people and parents having an incredibly tough time. It wasn't people like my son, you weren't looking at these scenes thinking, oh, I hope that happens to us, really. It was such a negative misery narrative, really. So I think it was all that stereotyping and bias. And also, I think we all like to think we're open-minded, but then something challenged me and I realized I wasn't open-minded at all until, I had this huge experience in my life. And then when I was interviewing autistic adults for the book, I found what they were saying, I didn't just understand it, I felt it viscerally, especially with the women. And so, I kind of afterwards thought, oh, maybe I'm in that sort of gray area between neurotypical and autistic. And maybe that's why I understood their points so well. And then over time, I realized I was autistic too. And then I, got myself assessed, and it was confirmed officially. And so now I wrote this book about ADHD, and a similar process happened. I was speaking to ADHD adults. And once again, particularly with women, I found their stories were my stories. And I was just thinking, oh my God, am I just like ridiculously suggestible? Or is it possible that I am both of these things? And then, I did get myself assessed for ADHD, and I am both.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that I speak to a lot of women who actually have the ADHD assessment first, and then the autism assessment, or the diagnosis comes. The more I speak to different clinicians, we're getting to hopefully to a point where we go for an assessment for both, and we're able to see which one maybe is the more dominant one, or like how they sit together and often how they collide, and being able to recognize, like you say, in this sort of non-stigmatized, non-scary way of, okay, so that was when my autism shows up. That's when my ADHD shows up. That's when they work together. That's when they don't. Because like you say, it's all about awareness. And many of us are ignorant, and many of us still, maybe our generation do have this stigmatized look of autism in one way, but it's trying to understand the spectrum and how it shows up, and how actually it's not as uncommon as we think it is, and being able to help each other in these family dynamics is how we grow and thrive with our neurodivergence. And I guess that's what the focus of your book is, isn't it? Is helping other families that what you went through, maybe who haven't done as much research as you have, to start being able to welcome it into the family, live with it, accept it, grow with it. I'd love to hear a little bit about, I guess, the insights, whether there was any insights that you got when you were writing this book that really helped you with your family.
Yeah, loads. So, I mean, the executive function chapter was a real eye opener, because I had underestimated how vast the impact of executive dysfunction is on people's lives. And actually, when I was researching, I remember reading something that said some people think that actually your executive function skills is a better predictor of the grades you're going to get than IQ. And I was just like, gosh, that really hit me, that school is all about executive function skills, and actually careers as well. And, I thought back to colleagues that have done so well and really risen the ranks, but maybe not be the most talented. And the flip side, you've got these incredibly talented people at work, potentially neurodivergent, that don't manage to climb the ranks. And then you just feel like life is one endless test of executive function skills.
That's a really actually fascinating insight. You're so right, because you think about it, the kids are judged on, they forget their homework, their handwriting, their organization skills, revision, exam conditions. And like you say, it's those moments of brilliance. Yes, they may be noticed or kind of celebrated, but all the other things are it seems more important, doesn't it?
Mm.
And I wonder, as we get more aware and we start, more people are understanding, like, how we can start changing things, especially in the academic system, because
Mm.
it is still so archaic in that respect, isn't it?
100%. And even specialist schools, don't always have the knowledge of this area and the impact of it. But also, I mean, I'm not a specialist in the executive function. I'm a person that's done my research. I'm not convinced the aim of the game is to come out with neurotypical levels of executive functioning skills. I think we just have to build in systems where we can, and also accept what we just can't easily do, and let ourselves off the hook for it. So I think we, like everything, like communication, like everything else, focus, we need to find our own middle path, really, for what we're striving for and aiming for. Because I think I'm never going to be brilliantly organized. And I do know actually some ADHDers they've got amazing Excel spreadsheets for their holiday packing. I'm thinking of one Fred in particular, but the cost is probably quite significant, really. But another thing I really enjoyed learning more about was dopamine and the neurotransmitters. So I felt I really put a lot of time and effort into trying to understand the brain science as much as I could, being a non-scientist. And so I thought it was fascinating to learn about dopamine's role. It sometimes gets explained as the happiness drug, which it isn't. It's the bedrock of executive function, and it's there to encourage us to do the sort of more sensible long-term thing. And also, the ADHD is, we know we don't have consistent supply of dopamine. But I didn't know till writing the book that it was because we have these neurotransmitters that are flushing away the dopamine, the transporters, before they can do their job. And also that leaving something to the last minute or making your activity more humorous or more novel, that you are self-medicating because you're providing yourself with cortisol and you're providing yourself with the serotonin that also helps you to focus. So I found all that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I think what many of us don't give ourselves enough credit for is the fact that we have probably built unknowingly these dopamine scaffolding systems to kind of get us through those very boring or unmotivating tasks or get us over the line, at the very last minute. And many of us have hacked our own systems just out of pure necessity. And what many of us, I think, and maybe I'll speak for myself, is that we kind of always felt like we were cheating or we were doing something
Mm.
wrong or not doing things how adults should do it. But actually, now that we're able to understand ourselves and understand, okay, this is where we have a deficiency, this is where we have an area where we really struggle, we can pat ourselves on the back and say, actually, this is how you were trying to get over something that was neurologically going on in your brain that you had no idea about. And I think
100%.
I think
Yeah.
it's really empowering for people to have this information that, that you've put in your book, because it's validation and it's a recognition of all the challenges and the exhaustion that we've gone through. And essentially, as adults, we don't want our kids to kind of go through that. Like, yes, we want to build their resilience. Yes, we want to hone their own sort of self-responsibility. But essentially, we want them to thrive and we want them to do well and lean into all the good that they have and get that support or the advocacy that they deserve. I wonder, from writing your book, what changed from as you as a parent when you were advocating for your children and you were speaking to the school, because I know there's a lot in this book about how you can advocate for your children.
Yeah. So, one practical change, actually, it's not so much about advocating at school, it's more helping kids to be happy, is validating more than I had been. I had a conversation with the psychiatrist, and she said to me, like, no matter how much you're validating your child's emotions, do it for longer. She said it is absolute magic. You can't do it enough. So she basically said, sit in your child's misery with them until they're ready to come out. And that phrase really stuck in my mind. So while I was writing it, we were going through a very tough time as a family. And I did find myself, kind of experimenting with validating more, i.e. saying, I understand why that's so tough. I'd be really upset too, not leaping to a conclusion. We all know we should do this. This is nothing new. But what was completely eye-opening for me was how successful it was to do it for longer than I had been doing it previously and what the impact was. So I found that my children calmed down quicker and I felt were more likely to come back to me, to talk to me about these really important stuff. And I had a structure and a plan when I potentially was a bit stressed hearing their unhappiness too. So that was amazing. In terms of support at school, I mean, I feel ADHD is getting a really, really bad deal at school. I don't think we can really compare between autistic and ADHD people in terms of who has it the worst, because both camps are not having a great time at all. But I think there is such an absence of knowledge with ADHD that isn't true of autism. There's no, I couldn't find any like really decent bodies of research about how we should be adapting our teaching styles for ADHD brains. We talk about dopamine. I just think, how cruel is it to sit a kid in school, especially early on when we have to do loads of subjects we don't want to do, where they've got no chance of summoning the dopamine really. And we just leave them there with them to wrestle with their own brain and not know why they can't make their brain work really. And then everything about school doesn't work for ADHD as in its current form, really. And the fact that it's sort of seen as a behavioral or a mental health issue when really it's its own distinct cognitive style. And that has not, I think we're quite a long way from the education system realizing that,
Yeah,
you know,
I agree.
don't give ADHD as just one thing to do, give them tasks that they can flip between. And also, I think it's really, really unfair for teachers to explain something once and then refuse to explain it again, because teachers still have this Victorian attitude of, well, I've explained it once, and if you weren't paying attention, that's your fault, really. I mean, I'm not saying teachers are doing this deliberately, but, that's just setting up ADHD kids to fail, really. And I do remember, myself, that kind of terror of not knowing what you're meant to be doing and just waiting to be told off because you're going to fail and you're going to annoy your teacher and you're trying to copy your peers. Not copy,
Yeah.
you're trying to search for clues.
And that anxiety is compounded, isn't it? Because you're just trying to listen, but your processing skills, it doesn't work with that, exactly what you just saying. I mean, I remember so well always being that person saying, what did they just say? Can you just repeat that to me? And I knew I was listening, but it just didn't go in. I need repetition. For me, it's repeat, write, listen to it again in a different way. For me, listening to podcasts, listening to anything on audio is so good for me because that's how I process. But at school, it's like, well, if you don't process it this way, you've got no other alternative and you just have to deal with it.
And you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, exactly. And you need to do something to fix yourself.
Fix yourself. And I think, like if we looked at the sort of perfect scenario, like imagine if that child said, oh, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing. And they are allowed to say that. And the teacher said, oh, were you zoned out? I do that too. We all do that. And, normalize that zoning out, I just think that would be so amazing. Or if we talked about that, if we talked about rejection sensitivity, if children knew about their own executive function difficulties and understood that's why you're finding these things so difficult. But teachers don't even yet have the vocabulary really or the knowledge to identify why students are finding things difficult.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, I would love to see all schools going through neurodivergent training. I know what you do with your business. And yes, we need it in companies, we need it everywhere. But I really do believe from every year, there needs to be some form of like refresher, like a day of all teachers have to attend neurodivergent training, understanding, going into workshops, helping to spot the signs of ADHD and autism, dyslexia, being able to almost screen for it, which I know doesn't take long. It doesn't have to be this big, long, official clinical assessment. It can just be a teacher going, oh, I'm noticing that girl, she's chewing her fingers and she's tapping her foot and she's looking out the window and she looks a bit sort of lost, and almost like, okay, I'm going to put her through that screening process. Almost, from the Department of Education, they have to sort of tick it. And again, I don't know all the language. I know that teachers' time, but this is kids' education. This is their self-esteem, their self-confidence. The amount of women that I've worked with who are brilliantly clever, highly educated to their own, unfortunately, they've gone through burnout and lots of mental health challenges to get to where they've got to because they knew that potential was there. But they still suffer. Their self-esteem and their self-confidence and their self-worth has taken such a battering from what a teacher said to them back in primary school, or that inner child hasn't healed after they were told by a teacher that they're not good enough. And so I just feel like if we can get there as early as possible in academia, where there's just this ecosystem of kids understanding, parents understanding, teachers, and none of this is, like you say, it's normalized and it's not stigmatized. And the good news is, and I always like to say that I have spoken to teachers and I have spoken to people who are really doing their best. There's actually a lot of teachers with ADHD. I think that's because they probably like the novelty of teaching different things and the hustle and the bustle and the passion that they have for education. And a lot of that is sort of like neurodivergent traits. And so I do take my hat off to many teachers who are doing their very best. Hi, everyone. I'm just interrupting my own podcast to let you know that if you're listening to this before the 16th of September, the doors to my brand new community space, More Yourself, are going to be opening very, very soon. On the 16th of September, I'm going to be running a free live workshop. It's a Q&A. It's pretty much me giving you a bit of an insight into what to expect from More Yourself and what's going to be like being part of this community space. And I'm really excited to be able to say that between the dates of the 16th to the 23rd of September, you're going to be getting the founders members price only. This is an absolute steal. It'll be £18 a month, or if you pay in full, £198 a year to be part of this community. Now, I really want to make this community accessible. And so I've created this space so you can catch your breath, you can feel supported, feel more like yourself, and not have to keep doing more, or be more productive, or prove yourself, or look for external validation. So we're going to be tackling things such as burnout, to bringing in different daily rhythms, from emotional storms to moving more into more kind of self-awareness and hormonal shifts. And we're going to walk through it together. I'm going to be doing a monthly live, it's a Q&A, and I'm going to be providing you with on-demand workshops. I'm going to be providing you with different type of audio that you've not heard before in the podcast. And I'm going to be bringing in some amazing experts to do more workshop style events, because I know so many of you are looking for support, whether you've just been newly diagnosed or you are still awaiting this diagnosis, or perhaps you're just happy with this realization but would love to be part of a like-minded community. So head to the show notes or head to my website, ADHDwomenswellbeing.co.uk. Look for More Yourself. I really, really can't wait to begin this. I've got so much to share. Honestly, since doing the book and writing the book and putting it out there, I feel a little bit stifled. I've got a lot more to share than, even from the publication of the book. So get yourself on the list, and I really hope to see you at the workshop on the 16th, and hopefully within this space we can all be a little bit more ourselves. Back to the podcast. My kid's neurodivergence shows up in so many different ways, and some have the anxiety, some don't, some have the dyslexia, or at least one of them, I think there's a crossover with autism that's not been officially diagnosed, but even they think it is as well. I know in the book you talk about PDA, which I'd love to kind of go a little bit, into. And I know you've got another child with chronic fatigue, and how we can have the very hyperactive, restless child. And we can also have, like you say, with one that needs a lot of downtime and needs to recoup energy and decompress and all those things. And, as parents, that it's hard work being neurodivergent, parenting neurodivergent kids, and managing the needs of the different styles of neurodivergence as well. Are you happy to discuss a little bit about the presentations of what's going on in your children, and I guess what you find challenging and difficult, and I guess what you have found helpful as well?
Yeah, so I talked at the beginning about how, if you can make your children happy, you're not so worried about difference. But the honest answer is I don't know if I would say my children are, well, they're not consistently happy at the moment. And that is, I've written 2 books on how to raise happy autistic and happy ADHD children. So I want to be absolutely clear. I'm writing this not as a person who's done everything right, but a flawed parent, in this dealing with these systemic issues that we all are. So, yeah, my eldest has chronic fatigue, as we mentioned. He's ADHD as well. The ADHD didn't get picked up until he was about sort of 13 or 14, because I didn't really know enough about ADHD. Now it's completely obvious he's very inattentive, but at the time I didn't know about that. And the youngest, yeah, he's much more sort of presentation extrovert. And then when I found out he was autistic, that like, what? Because I'd written a book on autism with a chapter on how to spot if your child's autistic. And I was mortified for someone to say he needs an autism assessment. I turned up arrogantly saying to them, I don't think he is. Yes, he may have traits. And then to say, yes, he is autistic and it's PDA. So really what I then learned was that what had blinded me to him being autistic was the PDA presentation.
Can you just explain what PDA is? Because there might be people that might not know the terminology.
Yeah, sure. So it's called pathological demand avoidance. Sometimes it's shortened to demand avoidance, and it is on the autism spectrum. And so there's some debate whether it is a distinct profile within the autism spectrum. So you get autistic people who are PDA, or whether it's a sign of an autistic person in distress, or the sort of accumulation of being in the wrong environment, and that results in demand avoidance. For what it's worth, my instinct is it's the former, that it's something that is, some difference in people's brain chemistry that makes them PDA. The best way I can explain it, and I also want to preface this to say it's horribly under-researched. I don't think anyone has got all the answers. What research we have suggests that it's mainly all DHD kids, as in ADHD and autism. But how I make sense of it is that the brain is interpreting demands as threats. So, for example, if you make a demand, what they call so-called ordinary demand of a PDA kid, then it might trigger a highly anxious response in them. But the trickiness with PDA is it's inconsistent. So if your PDA child's having a good day, they might be able to manage a few demands. But if they're having a bad day, they can't manage any demands whatsoever. So it can be difficult when you're explaining to relatives or the school, and then your child, someone tells them to do something and they trot off and do it. It can make some people doubt it, but in reality, like so much of what we're talking about, it's a fluctuating thing. But I think generally all demands are causing some level of anxiety. It's just whether the child is masking or able to kind of regulate themselves after the anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's really well explained. Again, I've seen those traits in two of my children, and they're the most similar to each other. It's very challenging as a parent, especially when you don't understand that it's PDA. It showed up for them when they were younger. It was hard work. It was really, really hard work. Can you do this? No, I'm not doing that. It's bedtime, not going to bed. Have this drink, I'm not drinking. Please drink. You're going to be dehydrated. And it's almost like you think they're doing this on purpose to wind you up. And then your regulation is tested. And then you kind of feel terrible as a parent that you've like lost your
Control?
shit.
Oh, shit. Yeah, regularly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we're tested. And I had a podcast guest on probably about a year or two, 18 months ago, and we talked about low demand parenting for PDA kids and how that can be so helpful for not only the child but also for the parent, because we're taking those unnecessary demands off, like the things that we think is like, please eat this healthy meal, or please don't sit at the table like this, or turn the iPad off. And so many things that would normally erupt in a family argument, like how can we mitigate those times where we do know that child is prone to dysregulation, or they've come home from school and they really do need to decompress, or they've been in a big social environment and the last thing they need is to sit at the table and eat with a knife and fork and have a conversation. These expectations that we put on I'm going to say inverted commas, like normal people. I struggled with that because for me, sitting at the table manners is important, speaking with respect is important, all of that. And I still have that, but I kind of tweak my expectations when I know that my child really does need to be left alone.
Yeah, I mean, it's intensely challenging, and the absolute honest truth is I'm totally signed up to ADHD and autistic brain types being 100% about strengths and challenges in exactly the same way neurotypical brains are. I mean, neurotypical brains are just the majority, they're not the right brain. But when it comes to PDA, and I feel like I might regret this, but, I feel like if I could take it away, I would, because it makes my son's life very, very difficult, and it makes our whole family's life difficult. That's not to say we're not doing stuff about it. he can cope with very, very minimal demands. Over the past 18 months, he's been out of school. I mean, the majority of PDA kids are not in full-time education. He just had a breakdown basically because of loads of stuff. You know, he was in a mainstream school, not properly supporting because they didn't have the money to support him. Nobody at the local authority had built a school for my son or thought about his needs really in their planning. So there was no school place. And, you know, he had quite a significant breakdown at the age of 9. And we were dealing with really, really distressed behavior. We're coming out the other side after 18 months. And low demand parenting is the only way to go. I actually, as an autistic person, I'm not that sold by everyone sitting at the meal anyway. I get the idea of togetherness as a family, but for me, and I definitely see it in my 2 sons, it's not a particularly relaxing thing to do. And I feel like we can chat at other times. So I sort of feel like, why am I putting everyone through this? We don't enjoy it. I'm not sure the concept is right for us. You know, if we were reimagining family life as autistic people, I don't think there would be that same setup. Although I do like doing it once every Sunday. You know, I'm not there yet, but that's my dream really. Nobody can sit still for dinner. I mean, it's just too taxing, etc., etc. And, you know, making unstructured chit chat, what's to love basically. So basic with low demand parenting, we don't really have a hierarchy where we're in charge. And that is the truth of it, because really we have to operate in a process of collaboration with my son, because PDA, they don't, again, I hate generalizing, but it is true with my son. He doesn't observe that hierarchy. He doesn't think because you're an adult or a school teacher, I'm going to listen to you and do what you say. It just doesn't work like that. So you can either argue, and the intensity of the argument is going to go up and up and up, and your child's mental health is going to go down and down and down, or you do it a different way. And it's, you know, it seems so counterintuitive. You're going to spend 40 to 50% of your time thinking, oh my God, am I raising a monster here? Because your child is getting their own way a lot of the time. But I really do believe in my sort of more rational moments that we're not raising monsters. We're raising people who, you know, we're lowering their anxiety, you know, and really sometimes when my son, you know, pushes all my buttons and I do lose my shit because it is intensely challenging. And, you know, I have come close to a breakdown, really, just having a child out of school for 18 months, dealing with PDA. It just can't be underestimated how exhausting it is to have this kind of very long negotiation or battle to get them to do anything. And it feels like the stakes are very high, that you're doing it in the moment. And if you get it wrong, there could be this really horrible, horrible consequence for everyone. And, you know, and so I try in the moment to think, if I just give in to my instinct to get angry and go head to head with my child because I want to be in control, I should be in control, all I'm going to do is make my child feel more shit about himself, because I'm going to push him into a meltdown. Things are going to be a consequence of that. And he's just going to feel deep shame afterwards because he will have behaved in a way that will make him feel awful. And I wanted to limit that as much as possible. And I don't succeed, but I do every so often manage to catch myself in that. And I think also, you know, being a PDA parent is really a lesson in trying to give up that sort of feeling of caring about other people's judgment. Now, obviously, I'm not there yet. I'm a people pleaser. I care deeply instinctively about other people's judgment. But I was at an NVR parenting course, which is nonviolent resistance, which CAMS had recommended we did, you know, very excellent for PDA parenting. I absolutely did not want to go. You know, parenting courses are not my idea of fun, really. But I went and it was amazing. And it was just like the single best thing I've done, really. But so what NVR teaches you is really it's about de-escalation. That is your number one goal, is de-escalation. They talk about striking while the iron is cold. So if your child has done something and you're really unhappy with it, don't, you know, sort of go toe to toe in the moment. Wait till they're calm and, sort of prioritize the connection between you two in those distress moments, but also give them space. And, you've got your sort of strategies really for calming them down. But then afterwards you can say, look, that was horrible for you. I found it stressful. Can we work together to find, a different way of doing things? But there was one parent, and he had this really amazing anecdote about, he went round a museum with his PDA son. Well, I assume the son was PDA, I don't know, but ADHD certainly. There was this sort of, the child was having a meltdown, and there was this huge sort of sweary ruckus going on by the child. And the strangers, he felt like he was getting judgmental looks from other parents. A security guard was looming into place and was about to take over. And the dad said he just had a really powerful thought, which was, fuck you. Fuck you all, because you don't have to pick up the pieces later on. So I don't have to care what you think. And so he said to the security guard, basically, back off. I know how to deal with this. You don't. He let his child just run around swearing, screaming, until this child calmed down. Then they went home, and much, much later they talked about it. But had he done what people wanted him to do, which was the performative telling off, that would have only extended the child's distress, extended the meltdown, and extended, the sort of disruption for everyone. There was no good to come of it. So when I'm in a situation and I want to feel embarrassed or awkward what people are thinking about my parenting, or I just have that fuck you in my head. And it's quite a useful, I don't think about it aggressively. It's just quite a useful 2 words to remind myself it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's a useful 2 words in many in many situations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I know so many other people listening will see this presentation, perhaps either in themselves or their children. And, listen, as a person with ADHD, I understand that need to have choice, autonomy. I want to be able to make a decision that impacts me, and I don't want someone to tell me what to do. Hence the reason why I work for myself. I'm an entrepreneur. That's why so many ADHDers are entrepreneurs. And I do wonder if that PDA kind of like becomes a bit more socialized as we get older, and we understand the conditioning that we've kind of got to, whether that's through masking or just from like seeing what, people, how we have to sort of behave. And it's morphed into this deep justice seeking, and things matter, and we want to make choices that are right for us. And like you say, this like, fuck you, I'm going to do it my way type thing. But being a parent with PDA involved is very hard. And I just want to touch on what you said about the shame for the children afterwards, because I've had this as well, where one of my kids has had the biggest public meltdown. I've been pinched, scratched, kicked, no shame at all in the situation. Like when it was happening, I sort of had to just grit my teeth and just deal with the situation. And thankfully, through understanding this and my own regulation skills, I kind of kept as calm as I could. It was still very challenging. But then within half an hour later, they'd calmed down. That shame kicked in. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I did that. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I don't want to feed into that shame spiral, because I've seen it happen in different family members of mine, different generations ago, where that shame is still quite real.
And
Yeah.
no kid wants to behave that way. I don't believe it. It's beyond people's control. So it's really important we're really clear that wasn't your fault. You were in a bad environment. That wasn't, about you. But I think, again, I know it's developing knowledge, but I think demand avoidance, every human being has demand avoidance. But I'm assuming that with, neurodivergent people, it steps up a gear. But with PDA, I think it steps up another level. And I think with research that has been done on PDA adults, the mental health outcomes are absolutely dreadful. I will spare you. But that's why it's so important to the low demand parenting, because, and I often think I've got bigger fish to fry than whatever the kind of social niceties that are expected of me to instill in my child. I also think we can get really carried away thinking, well, if my child hasn't built up these social skills by the age of 7, they're going to never know how to behave in public. And that's just not true. I, as a autistic woman, a lot of my social skills have developed in my 30s, really, when I started to figure stuff out. So I think, we don't need to prioritize social skills or oh my God, what happens if they work in an office, how are they going to ever work with the boss? You know, the world of work is changing, etc. So I think just prioritize your child's self-esteem and, you know, lessen that feeling of shame and give them the language for that is demand avoidance. And you find this hard because of this. You know, let's think of how we can change situations so it's not so hard for you. And do that first and worry about sort of social skills and how's your child going to work in an office later on. That's my view.
Yeah, I mean, as a mother and someone who's also autistic and dealing with that and the pressures of PDA in a family, how do you look after yourself and how do you kind of find those times to decompress and self-regulate and so you can have the resources to deal with these very challenging
Mm.
situations?
I mean, I deal with it badly, in all honesty. I can sort of know what you're meant to do, but I'm not good at applying to myself. And I suspect you're probably a bit like me. I always take on far too much. Always, always, always. You know, I quit my job actually when my son was having difficulty at work. I was in a very sort of senior role on a newspaper. And I quit my job because obviously I needed to be at home with him and it was absolutely the right thing to do. But then I wrote a book, co-founded a company, you know, and I'm doing journalism. So I've dug myself into a hole, if I'm honest, and I've had some very difficult times in the last month because my son's been having a difficult time. So I'm having to recalibrate again. But I've got children. Their support needs are quite high, but if you met them, if I took them out, people wouldn't see it. I had a chat with my eldest psychiatrist and she said, "Do you realize you're a carer?" And do you know, it really stopped me in my tracks and it made me burst into tears because it was kind of like, well, that's why I'm finding it so hard. And I think in a way, acknowledge that you are taking a quite a significant carer's role. And if you are that thing, chances are you are, then you need respite care. And so then work out, how do I get respite care? Okay, do I need to speak to the local authority? Can we afford it ourselves? Or are there family and friends I can explain the situation about, talk to friends? Because I think often this behavior happens in closed doors. It's absolutely exhausting for us. It's, you know, even though I communicate for a living, I find it really difficult to explain to people what the last 18 months have been like for us. So I think recognize your own support needs as much as possible and do practical stuff to try and manage your workload and your own happiness.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for, first of all, the validation, because that hits hard. And I'm sure for a lot of people that will make them realize that is why I'm so exhausted
Yeah.
and drained. And I find this so difficult in many ways. And, you know, many of us are wanting to. We have lots of other things that we want to fulfill and ambitions, and we have, brains that are fizzing with ideas, and we want to, run our businesses or, enjoy our careers, but we're also, there's a lot of needs going on in our family as well. And that juggle, is always there. And the balance is probably always slightly off. And I'm exactly with you. I overcommit. I want to do it all. I get overwhelmed and then I burn out. And it's just kind of, and I'm constantly tweaking and changing and pulling back. And like you say, that recalibration of like, okay, what do I say no to now? Like, what do I let go of, even though I really want to do it because the needs of my family are there. So I just think your honesty and your vulnerability is really, really refreshing. And I know that this episode is going to help a lot of people. And your book, I want to just say it's called ADHD, How to Raise a Happy ADHD Child. How
I
can they contact you?
I do get lots of people contacting me all the time through the autism book. So yeah, people can always get hold of me on social media. You know, I'm on X, I'm on LinkedIn, but also if you go on Neuro Universe's website, you'll see, you know, the contact email. I spend quite a lot of time actually helping families, you know, with how to deal with situations in school. So I will always kind of reply to people. And if I haven't replied, it's because I haven't seen it.
Yeah, or maybe you're trying to deal
Not
with
have a
other
breakdown.
things. Yes, yes, exactly. Maybe have some boundaries as well. But Jessie, thank you so, so much. I'm going to put all the details in the show notes so people can find you. And it's been a real pleasure having this conversation.
Thank you. I've loved it too.
If this episode has been helpful for you and you're looking for more tools and more guidance, my brand new book, The ADHD Women's Wellbeing Toolkit, is out now. You can find it wherever you buy your books from. You can also check out the audiobook if you do prefer to listen to me. I have narrated it all myself. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you for the next episode.